أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Over the past few nights we've talked a little bit about the importance of fasting and what makes fasting unique and what also connects it with our other acts of worship, our obligations and our fara'id. And after that introduction, I would like to now begin a series of brief talks about the tafsir of some of the shorter chapters of the Quran. And rather than go through in a comprehensive kind of tafsir, what I will try to do is every day take a look at one of the surahs of the 30th juz and just give a few points that help us understand that surah better and relate to that surah better. In many cases, we have different types of hindrances from a good understanding of the Quran. One of those hindrances is that we read the Quran not in terms of the concepts that come together, but in terms of a set number of ayat or a set number of pages, or sometimes we have a particular juz or para of the Quran. We say that we're going to do, for example, the entire Quran in Shahr Ramadan. And so we will read 1/30th of the book every day. Now, that is good, and it was also the practice of the Imams. They did have Qur'ans that they had divided up into the number of days that they wanted to finish the entire book in. Imam Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam had one copy of the Quran that he had divided up into 14 parts to finish the entire Quran in about 2 weeks, so a little bit more than 2 juz every day. There's nothing specific about reading 1 juz or 1/30th of the Quran every day. That's just one division that allows you to finish the book in a month. And that too if the month is 30 days. If Shahr Ramadan is 29 days, then you have to do more than 1 juz every day. But the point is that that is not related to the theme or the topic of those verses. It's just a division of the Quran. Similarly, when we say that I'm going to do a page or 2 pages, we don't have a set theme that we are dealing with. Now, what is the solution to that? One might say the solution is that, well, you can divide the Quran into surahs. But the surah also is not a very good division, because the surahs sometimes are very short, and sometimes they are quite long, and even the short surahs sometimes cover several different topics. The long surahs almost universally, maybe with the exception of Surah Yusuf, they cover many different topics. And it's not always clear where does one topic begin and one topic end. So today we're going to look at Surah An-Naba. And as you will see, Surah An-Naba is a very short surah. In this Quran that we have from Uthman Taha, it is a page and a half and a total of 40 verses. And yet it has several themes and several different topics that it talks about. So what is the solution? The best solution is to try to look at the verses of the Quran as if you are listening to somebody talk to you. And this is mentioned in many different ahadith from Ahlul Bayt. Don't read the Quran as a book. It isn't a book. The Quran is Allah speaking to the Prophet. And the Quran is Allah speaking to each and every one of us. When the Qur'an is speaking to each and every one of us, then it means that it is alive. And it's not just to be understood in terms of history, but it is to be understood in terms of the effect that it has on me as I am reading it. And the miraculousness of the Qur'an is that freshness that comes from its verses having many different layers and levels of meaning. It's not just a matter that the Arabs at that time, they were a very eloquent people, and they were challenged by the Qur'an to bring something like the Qur'an, and they were unable to do it. If that were the challenge of the Qur'an, if that were the tahaddi of the Qur'an, then it would be a dead challenge. Because ask your Arab friends, how many Arabs even today have that eloquence where they can compose a very proper and grammatical and fluent line of poetry? Out of the hundreds of millions, it might be a very small number of people. It's not part of the general culture or the general ability of people. And so even in the Arab world, there would be very few people who would even be able to compose eloquent speech and understand the challenge, let alone try to respond to it. And among the non-Arab world, throughout Asia, throughout Africa, throughout the Americas and Europe, there might be almost nobody who would be able to actually even understand and take up that challenge for them to then say that I was unable to do it. So that's only one small part of the miraculousness of the Qur'an, the linguistic miracle. The greater part of the miracle of the Qur'an is that it is a book that at the same time as it speaks to a ma'soom, it also speaks to every sincere person who reads the book. And so look at the book, read a few verses, and then pause and think about it and see what is their connection, what is the takeaway message that you have, and then move on to the next series of verses. And the chapter divisions that we have, they are not meant to tell you when one topic ends and another topic begins. If you look at tafsir, there are certain cases where you even see that the topic continues from one surah to the other. Perhaps Surah Al-Anfal and Surah Tawbah can be one example. Perhaps Surah Al-Fil and Surah Quraysh can be another example, but we do have examples in the Qur'an where there's two chapters, but the topic is interrelated. And we have many examples where there's one surah, but many different topics are covered, but there is no explicit division, that this is where one starts, and this is where the other starts. The reason for that is that in conversation, we don't normally have chapter headings, punctuation, and all of those different types of markers that we have in formal speech. When I'm talking to you, I might be talking to you, and then I will talk to somebody else, and I will say something, and then you might interrupt me, and I might interrupt you. And that's the nature of conversation. And that's what keeps it interesting, and that's what keeps it alive. So the Qur'an, it has that conversational tone. How can you then understand what is going on in conversation? Now, think about this. When you're reading a written text, you have paragraphs. In English, you have capitalization, you have punctuation, you have a clear mark of a sentence beginning, a sentence ending, you have bold, you have italics, all of those helpful hints. But between me and you, is it easier for you to understand somebody when they are speaking to you, or when you're reading something that they wrote? When they're speaking. Because you can see their tone, you can see their gestures. What you know of that person, most importantly, is the best indication of what they actually mean. And then all of that punctuation, all of those different signs that we make, they're just an imperfect approximation of what we can experience when we're face to face with somebody. So with Allah, we're not face to face with Allah. We don't see a smile, we don't see a frown, we don't hear a change in voice. But what we do is we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if we look within ourselves, then we know Him much more intimately than we know anybody whom we might speak to. And if you can understand my tone and my accent after speaking with me, then you have an even closer connection and an even closer relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you just need to be attentive to it. So that's the spirit that we read the Qur'an in. And then sometimes the abrupt changes in topic, sometimes the confusing aspects of the Qur'an, they begin to be the most beautiful and the most insightful for us. So let's look at Surah An-Naba. And Surah An-Naba, it starts with one of those confusing aspects. It says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Amma yatasa'alun anil naba'il azim alladhi hum fihi mukhtalifun. What do they talk about? What are they asking each other about? They ask each other about an-naba'il azim, the great news, alladhi hum fihi mukhtalifun, that they have divisions and that they have disputes about. Now, it's a very interesting introduction. In public speaking or communication, they will sometimes say that you have to have a hook. Get your audience interested right from the beginning. So the Qur'an has a very interesting hook. But then when you have that introductory hook, that message that you want people to listen to, you also have to address what it is that you raised. So if I start a speech, I say that I'm going to start a speech and ask you, what is the best kind of cure you have against cancer? And all of a sudden, everybody is going to listen to me and say that this is something that I need to pay attention to. And then I finish my talk and I never answer your question now that's coming to your mind, what is the best kind of prevention or the best kind of cure you have against cancer? Is it going to be an effective hook or it's going to be an ineffective hook? It's going to be an ineffective hook if the point was to answer the question. So if my point was to tell you that you need to eat more fruits, or that you need to avoid radiation, or that you need to do something specific differently in your life, and I don't address it, then I've been ineffective. But when I raise that question as a hook, maybe there is no one right answer that our science or our medicine has been able to understand until now. And so maybe my purpose is not to tell you this is the answer, but my purpose is to tell you that you need to understand this is an important question. And you need to think about that question and spend your life in understanding what is the meaning of that question. Now, if my purpose is to give you an answer, and I don't give you the answer, then I've defeated my own purpose in the whole talk. And the hook might be interesting, but in the end, you'll leave frustrated. That, well, he told me that he was going to talk about how to prevent cancer, how to cure cancer, and he never did. If my purpose, however, is to tell you something that it is important, and that you need to try to gain an understanding of it, you don't need an answer. In fact, if I give you an answer, it'll defeat the purpose. Because all of a sudden you might think that, well, I just need to have more blueberries, and I won't have that health problem. Any of the health articles that we have, they have this problem. They tell you 7 superfoods that will cure whatever illness you have. And then a person says that I just need to do these 7 very simple things, and I don't need to worry about my blood pressure. I don't need to worry about that health issue. Is that helping or harming you? It might have been better for you not to know the superfood, but to know that you have to be careful about your blood pressure and get it tested every so often, and then examine yourself and test yourself. That might be more healthy than having a simple answer and it being an incomplete or an imperfect answer. The frustration people have with the Qur'an is that sometimes it gives you a question, عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ, and it doesn't give you a clear answer. The Qur'an didn't forget to tell you what is that Naba' Azim. The Qur'an wanted you to know that you have to continue to ask and examine, and then through these verses try to make sense of what that An-Naba'ul Azim could possibly be. If the Qur'an had said that I'm speaking about this, then it would have defeated the purpose. Because then it wouldn't have been an invitation for contemplation, it would have simply been a response, and a very short and a very easy answer. So here is what we can talk about with regard to the answer of that question. On one level, The Quran itself simply says that the people are asking about an-naba al-azim. It doesn't tell us what that question or what that answer is. But then the following verses, it says, they will know, soon they will know, and then it begins talking about the creation of the earth, the creation of the mountains, the creation of human beings as spouses, and the order of our day, that we sleep at night, and that during the day we go and we try to earn our livelihood. And so the Quran paints a picture of order and purpose within creation, and then after a series of verses in that way, it says that you will have a day of resurrection, when you will be called before your Creator and you will be held to account. Now, does that answer the question? Well, on the one hand, the Quran is talking about Qiyamah. So maybe one possibility is that an-naba'ul azim is Qiyamah, the day of resurrection. And that's one opinion that has been expressed. Another opinion is that it is the message of the Prophet himself. The Prophet came to Mecca, and there were Jews, there were Christians, there were people who believed in God, but they didn't believe in any kind of Sharia or any kind of divine law. And there were different kinds of beliefs in Mecca and in Arabia as a whole. And so this Naba Azim was the Quran, and Shahada of Tawheed and of Nubuwah. This was a controversial, very important new message. These are some of the opinions that have been expressed, and there's other opinions that have also been expressed. But then we come to a hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, and we find something that is almost seemingly in a different direction. The hadith is from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. He says, مَا لِلَّهِ آيَةٌ أَكْبَرُ مِنِّي وَمَا لِلَّهِ نَبَأٌ أَعْظَمُ مِنِّي. Allah does not have any sign that is greater than I am, and Allah does not have any news that is more important than I am. Now, there are some people who say that these are Shia crimes. I don't know if you've heard that term. I think it was made up by people who discuss these interpretations of the verse, and they say the Quran is not talking about wilayah. It's not talking about imamat as far as I can see. It simply says, أَنِ النَّبَأِ الْعَظِيمِ الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ مُخْتَلِفُونَ. And it might be talking about something general. Probably it's talking about Qiyamah or Quran or Nubuwah, as the people say. And all of a sudden the Shia come and say, this is about our Imam. And we have our du'as, we have our ziyarat, we have our ahadith that say that Imam Ali is an-naba'ul azim. So now the question is, are we committing a crime, and are we interpreting the Quran in one particular way, or is that actually what the Quran is hinting at and addressing? And to understand that, we have to take a little bit of a glance at what is going on in these verses. In these verses of the Quran, again, the purpose that Allah has is not to tell us that this list is the things that we're talking about. Number 1, Tawheed. Number 2, Nubuwah. Number 3, the Quran. Number 4, Ma'at. That's not the point. The point is that Allah is saying that there are certain things that create controversy within people's lives. And that controversy generally is not something theoretical. It's always because of the practical effect of a principle. And so, if Allah had just said that you have to believe that there is a God, and that English expression, is there a God, its expression itself and the question is a demeaning and an improper question. There is not a God, there is God. If the question is simply a theoretical question, does a creator exist? Is there a God? Then it doesn't have to be a controversial question, as long as there is no practical effect on your life. The problem comes not in the fact that God exists, but in the fact that God's existence means that I have to live my life in a certain way. I have to follow, I have to obey, I have to submit, I have to say no to certain temptation, and I have to say no to my lowest, basest desires. So if that's where controversy comes from, then what the Qur'an is calling our attention to is this statement, الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ مُخْتَلِفُونَ. Whatever causes controversy, whatever causes people to become divided, because it is a matter of principle that has an effect in practice. And the deepest controversies are the ones that come closest to our own prior desires, assumptions, and prejudices. So if, for example, you were to say to me, is racism or prejudice bad? Then in a theoretical sense, I will say, of course it's a bad thing. Why should anybody be prejudiced against another human being? But then if I'm going to buy a house, that same person who says that I would never want to be a racist, I would never be friends with a racist, they go to buy a house and they see there's too many of the wrong minority group in that neighborhood. Do they buy the house, or do they say that I'm going to look for something else? They'll look for something else. They don't want to call themselves a racist. They might not identify as a racist, but then it's my house, my kids, my family, the school district. I don't want them to have so many of group X or group Y, because then what are my kids going to grow up like? What am I going to pay my property taxes for if I can't trust the school district and I have to send my kids to a private school or to a different school? So these types of issues, they become more controversial when it comes close to our prejudices, our interests, our prior expectations. And so the assumption of this Quranic verse is not that you need to come to an answer and say, here's the list. It's talking about Qur'an. It's talking about Nubuwah. It's talking about Tawheed. But look and see, where is the controversy? Where is the reason that people have a hard time submitting and accepting? And if that is what the Qur'an is drawing attention to, then if you look at Islamic history, then there is no doubt that political leadership and religious leadership and religious guidance is the most important issue that Muslims have not been able to settle and that Muslims have had disagreements about. You read the Qur'an and you understand it in one way. I read the Qur'an, I understand it another way. So is reason going to be the final arbiter? Is a hadith of the Prophet going to be a final arbiter? If it's going to be reason, then how do we define reason? If it's going to be a hadith, then whose hadith? And if one companion has one hadith and another companion has another hadith, then who are we going to accept? That's why we have so many conflicting schools of thought, so many conflicting fatwa, so many conflicting political and religious groupings within the Muslim world. So if the Qur'an is saying that we're talking about ikhtilaf, الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ مُخْتَلِفُونَ, then what is the issue that not because we're looking for some kind of cut and dry cookie cutter answer, but through the experience of the ummah, what is the issue that is most important and that is most divisive and that has caused the most bloodshed and the most harm to the Muslim ummah other than imamat and other than leadership? And so is it now a Shia diversion of the Qur'an from its intended meaning? Or is it an application of the verse where it most cleanly and most obviously and most directly is applicable? You see that understanding of imamat, it's not a diversion. The ikhtilaf that Muslims have is not about salat. In the Sunni community, you have some people who say the proper way to perform salat is with your hands down by the side. That is the preferred way to pray in the Maliki school of fiqh. And you have others who say that you should preferably fold your hands around on your stomach, or a little bit higher or a little bit lower. That is a difference, but it's not something where we say الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ مُخْتَلِفُونَ and it's caused diversion and it's caused lasting dispute within the Muslim world. But the question of, can we follow Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam as an authority? People went to jail for that. People were put to death for that. And even today, in our own time, people are martyred while they are fasting, while they are performing their ibadat in their masajid because of their answer to that question. So the point is that in the Quran, we don't deny that it also encompasses other things that people had ikhtilaf about. And in fact, if we think of the Quran, as we said earlier, that it is a book that is in conversation with us, then at different times, there might be different things that Allah is referring to and which are included in this verse. So in the beginning of the Prophet's mission, Tawheed itself was controversial. And the meaning of Tawheed was controversial. But then as people began to understand Tawheed within the Muslim community, then the ikhtilaf came not about nubuwah, but about the extension and continuation of the guidance of nubuwah, which is imamah. And this is what we find in some very beautiful ahadith of our imams. There is a hadith of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam. He says this exact answer. When he was asked, what is an-naba'ul azim? He says, it is the wilaya of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Why? لأن رسول الله ليس فيه خلاف. Because about the Prophet, Muslims don't have any ikhtilaf. If it were talking about the Quran, if it were talking about Rasulullah, then this would just be a historical verse of the Quran. It wouldn't be a relevant verse of the Quran. The Imam is not denying that nubuwah and Tawheed were also part of this verse historically. Because in order to have a controversy about imamat, you have to have a controversy about nubuwah. A nubuwah that does not have an imam after it is a very different nubuwah than a nubuwah which has imamat after it. So it is relevant to that. But to keep the verse alive, we have to understand what are the present, relevant, living extensions of that controversy. And so the Imam says that this is speaking about wilaya. لأن رسول الله ليس فيه خلاف. People don't have a dispute or a controversy about the Prophet. In another hadith, we have from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, he says, النبأ العظيم الولاية. That النبأ العظيم in general is wilaya. And what wilaya means, as we explained yesterday, is that string that is like a link between different pearls that makes them into a necklace. Right? You have disparate elements within your life. What brings them all together and gives order and gives purpose, that is wilaya. And so when the Imam says that this Naba'ul Azim is wilaya, it means that it refers to Allah, and it refers to Nubuwah, and it refers to Tawheed, and it refers to the attributes of Allah, and it refers to all components of the spiritual message, and it refers to all of the elements of our external life. As we said, the verses speak about day and night, and how we are created as spouses, and how we earn our livelihood, because all of those are pieces of our life. But then, is my devotion to my spouse just a human relationship between two people? Or is it a spiritual relationship that is eternal, beyond my life, beyond the life of my spouse, but for all eternity? What determines that? Wilaya. Is my life for my children, my love for my children, just a human love that even many animals and many mammals have for their offspring, at least for a limited time? Maybe some offspring, we care for them for 18 years, some of them we care for them for 20 years, and then we set them on their way? Or is it an eternal relationship that is rooted not in my needs or my desires or my emotions, but in a sense of spiritual purpose? The difference between those two is wilaya. My ma'ash, where the Quran says here in Surah An-Naba, وَجَعَلْنَا النَّهَارَ مَعَاشًا. Is my ma'ash just something that I am going to earn and that I'm going to spend and then it's gone? Or is it something that is eternal, that will stay with me? If we have wilaya and our purpose is met in every element of our life, then even this money that I spend on my family is part of my savings for eternity. It's not just the sadaqah I give to the poor. It's not just the khums I give or the donation I give to the masjid. But the money that I spend on myself and the money that I spend on my family is also a saving for my eternal life, if it is done through that wilayah of Allah and the wilayah of the Prophet and the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt. And so we can see that rather than being what some people sometimes say, and the reason I spent some time on this is because people are sometimes dismissive of these ahadith. And they say, well, the Shia, they want to turn everything into Ahlul Bayt. Every verse is Imam Ali. Yes, every verse is Imam Ali, and if you understand the philosophy of it, then it will make sense and it will give purpose to every other area of our life. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Confirm what you are contemplation on the issue. Allah has this never divided into four sections. The first of all is when he said Amma Yasa'alun, then he gives the in depth of his creation, then goes into the
Qiyamah.
second section of the verses of the Quran where it says about those who are going to face the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who are not on the path of Allah, and those who are muttaqeen, and Allah will reward them for that. So these are not issues that would be to be contemplated as an issue of khilaf, because it's Allah affirming this in the Yawm al-Fasl kana miqata, in the muttaqeen mafaza. So it's an affirmative answer of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are not points of division. The point of division is what we are discussing here as wilayah.
Yeah, so those verses, they're relevant. The question was that the few further verses of Surah Al-Naba, they don't discuss things that are controversial, like about Qiyamah or about the questioning and then the reward or punishment of the good doers, that muttaqeen will have mafaz, and the impious will labithina fiha ahqaba. So these are not controversial. They were controversial at one time among non-Muslims, but not among Muslims. But this does set the stage that because we have Qiyamah, because we have to answer for our actions, it means that we have to live our life in a certain way. And then what that means when we have to live our life, what does it mean to live a life as a Muslim, that is going to cause controversy. And the controversy will come specifically in the overall umbrella of wilayah, of who we have to follow, who we have to obey, who we have to honor, whose teachings we have to maintain. And those issues become important if we want to have meaning in every area of our life. And so if I say that, well, I'm a Muslim and I love my family, and this person's a non-Muslim and they love their family, and it's all the same, then it doesn't even come to a question of wilayah. But if I want my love for my family to be different than just a human love or an animal love or an emotional love or a subconscious love, then this question does come in. That where does it fit in, how is it to be expressed, and what are we to sacrifice for a greater good, and when and how. So those are the ways that wilayah is relevant.